Well, would you look at that? It's a Fannie Mae bag on the kitchen table. Would you like it, Bon Bon? You know, you look like you like candy. So let's see what's in here. Oh, well, that doesn't look like candy. What do you suppose all this is? Let's see, we have a board that says Sony on it. A bag of miscellaneous screws. A front panel of some kind with a display on it. A 14-segment display, no less. Some buttons. This is a power supply. And this looks like some kind of a logic board. And then over here, this is an optical drive. What does that say it is? It says it's a BD DVD drive. Blu-ray disc. Blu-ray! That's right, folks. Somebody gave me a Blu-ray player, but it's definitely some assembly required. This was given to me by somebody at my place of work a couple of months ago, maybe even a year ago. I don't know, it's been a long time. And I never did anything with it. I'm not really sure what motivated them to take it apart, but this is everything I got, minus one or two wiring assemblies, which have doubtlessly been lost to the sands of time. And so just as kind of a kitchen table electronics resurrection of some kind, or even just for the fun of it, I thought I might try to resurrect this thing by putting all the boards together, and who knows, maybe you could learn something from this. It's hard to say what people get out of my videos, but I hope that people get a lot out of them. Anyway, over here we have this logic board and this front panel, and so basically all I have to do is figure out how the various boards go together. Now, when you're doing this on your own, if you ever have the fortune to work on a device that someone else has been in, you may find all kinds of interesting things, and that's just generally true. But in general, when you're trying to figure out, how does something that was taken apart go together, there are usually some clues. Now, not every device is thoughtfully engineered, but a good and plenty of them certainly are, and so there are things that you can look at to determine what you need to know about how something hooks together. Like, for example, this connector right here is fairly unique, and there's only one place that it can plug in out of any of these boards, and that must be right here. Get it aligned. There we go. So there, now we have two boards put together. And probably the next board that we'd need is the power supply board. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. I don't want to put this stuff on this nice kitchen table and try it out. Alright, now I've gone ahead and gotten things laid out on the table here in a way that I think makes sense. And this is basically the way you can start putting a device of any type back together, is to look at the connectors and make some hypotheses on how they go together. Now, looking at this logic board reveals some very interesting things. In particular, this silicon image display chip over here has got some kind of adhesive over a row of its pins. Now I wonder why that could be. Obviously the output path of a Blu-ray video signal is protected, but I wonder if that's an attempt to close some kind of a hole that would allow unencrypted signals to be tapped. Unfortunately, we have the Digital Millennium Copyright Act that pretty much stifles anything I could say about that, so yay for progress. But moving right along, here's the power supply board over here, and again, just by inference, you can see there's two connectors here that would make any sense to plug into this. And it's just a guess here, but again, it's a pretty good guess going by size that this one plugs in right here. I hope I get this right. Yeah, that one's too short. And that one plugs in right there. And then this one plugs in right here. So now we've got the power hooked up. That leaves us with two other boards. This little button board. And then this thing right here, which is the display board that also has three interesting LEDs on it. Of what purpose, I'm uncertain. Now, there's something that's kind of cool about this, and these officially do not exist. This kind of surprised me when I saw all these pieces assembled together for the first time. If you look at this drive, you'll see this is nothing more than a conventional 5¼ inch half-height optical drive. Now, a lot of times, makers of DVD players and stuff will get at least somewhat creative with the pinout of these things, so that without adaptation or even without active signal translation, you can't use them with a computer. But this is something that officially doesn't exist. This was made by Pioneer in Japan, which is kind of unique. This, folks, is a parallel ATA desktop-style Blu-ray drive. That is absolutely right. Now, parallel ATA laptop-style Blu-ray drives exist, but I've never seen anybody selling a desktop version of the same. I guess because they think that desktop drives are all going to have serial ATA connections. In fact, I was kind of surprised by this because I didn't even know that parallel ATA was fast enough to maintain the kind of data rate that Blu-ray playback requires. But after examining this and plugging it into a desktop computer, it functions as an ordinary drive. And if you're looking for one of these, it's a model number BDV-101ASO. And again, it was made by Pioneer Corporation. Now, I didn't get all the cables with this thing, so I'm going to have to come up with some ingenuity here. I'm going to need a 40-pin parallel ATA cable for that, but I have plenty of those downstairs. I have to hook all this stuff up. And I'm also going to need some kind of a power cable to get some power into this power supply board, which I want to make sure does not short out against anything, because if I do, the results might be fairly flammable, and then I'd set fire to the cutting board, and pretty soon I'd have yet another kitchen fire on my hands. So the next thing to do is to go ahead and hook this front panel up, and we're running out of available connectors here, and you should note that not every connector you might find is going to be used. For example, these two here, either I don't have the things for those, or they're features that simply aren't used. I really don't know. There are definitely some features over here on the power supply board that aren't used. There's this connector, which is marked writer, which actually goes to the Blu-ray drive. I don't know if maybe Sony was planning to market a recording-capable version of this, or if they use this same power supply in something else like a DVD recorder or something. And then there's this over here that says HDD1, which is probably for a hard disk drive. But as far as I know, this player didn't actually have a hard disk drive. But it's impossible to say for sure because I don't have all the pieces. I guess we'll find out when I get it together. And of course I have my trusty little television set ready to help me verify that this thing either does or does not work. Alright, I got everything hooked up for the initial test. Let's see what happens here. This ought to be interesting. I'll turn the little television set on here. And if you're going to do this yourself, a little word about safety here. You absolutely don't touch anything on this power supply board when it's plugged into the wall, because a number of these parts can energize their heat sinks and things like that, and this can turn really dangerous and bad really quickly. Likewise, anything involving exposed electrical wiring like this over here, don't do this unless you know exactly what you're getting into, because if you don't, and you touch something by mistake, you could kill yourself dead, especially if you're not in the best of health. So don't take unnecessary chances, and definitely don't do anything stupid. So let's see what happens here. Go ahead and plug this in, and we'll just see if there's any sign of life here. Now, I don't have a power button to hit, unfortunately, but I'm hoping that maybe, if these firmware programmers at Sony were as smart as they ought to be, that maybe another button will imply that the thing should turn itself on. So let's see what happens here. Let's hit this play button and just see what happens. Nothing yet. And unfortunately I did not get a remote, so I can't send the proper power on signal to this thing. I don't have a power button, which I think plugs in over there. I don't have anything like that. So how am I going to get the power to turn on? Alright, I got it. Let's see what happens here on the TV screen. Now, the way I did this, in case anybody's wondering, and unfortunately I needed both hands to do it, and this has to be used with caution. You never do this on anything that carries any appreciable amount of current because you're asking for it, or high voltage circuits. You just don't do this. But on low voltage signaling, like it's used here, low current, relatively low risk, moisten your finger and run it along the back side of a set of pins and see if you can provoke a response. In this case, we have boot up. So I guess the next thing to do is to get an optical disc in here and see if this thing will actually work. Alright, so I did a little rewiring in the outlet so I had room to plug everything in. I'll tell you what, when I finally do get my own house built, It's going to have outlets upon outlets. There's never going to be a question about having enough room to plug stuff in. Here we are. No disc. Well, let's fix that. Let's give it a disc here. Pop something in there. You know, I do my level best to amuse the record companies. Why don't I try to amuse the motion picture and television companies? Pop that in there. Unfortunately, I don't have anything on Blu-ray. Otherwise, I'd try that. But let's see if it goes ahead and decides to do a search against the disc and see if anything's going to come up here. It's doing something. I hear the drive making noise. But apparently it doesn't think it's got a disc yet. So let's just try rebooting this thing again. Start it over with a disc in it. This is going to be a very interesting way to watch a movie, isn't it? Come on. So your skin has a capacitive effect to it. There we go. And that's why using a moistened finger on a low voltage, low current circuit, such as this front panel, is generally a pretty safe thing to do if you're in at least average health. So let's see what happens when this thing boots up here. Hopefully it'll notice it has a disc in it, and it'll go ahead and play it. But again, I don't have an eject button here, so I can't eject the disc the proper way. I had to use the button on the drive. Now it says it's loading. Let's see what happens here. Definitely doing something, isn't it? Oh yeah, we got white lights and play. Got a counter now. Turn up the volume here, see if there's anything can be... Oh, the volume's already up a bit on this TV. Menu, it says. Well, would you look at that? It'll at least play a DVD, won't it? Tell you what, now I just have to devise a cabinet for this thing, and I'll have a spiffy Blu-ray player, won't I? Some assembly required, of course. Previews. Well, maybe they won't mind a little free advertising, who knows.
You know his car, his cigar. You don't have to. Oh, and his dog.
It sits around the house and drools.
But do you know
This is very interesting.
his first name?
Lieutenant! I think I'm phrasing it.
Columbo. The biggest name in crime solving is now
Listed as an asset securing a loan.
It's been hot.
I think you should try to find a way to calm down.
Do you mind?
I'm suggesting that you hire Mr. Rockford as the security person here at the Cove.
I don't do that kind of work.
But here's the conclusion, and there's a twist to this story. As it turns out, the person who gave me the parts, a couple months later, they gave me a complete player. And the player is functional. The only thing they said that it needed was a firmware update. I don't know if that's true or not, because I don't have anything on Blu-ray. I don't intend to buy anything on Blu-ray anytime soon unless someone's giving it away, and I don't even own a television set that can take advantage of Blu-ray. So, what I've got here is basically a complete bag of spare parts for this player. And it probably is in some way worth noting that while they are both the same player, they're both Sony BDP S300s, at least the internals between the two are very much the same and hooked up in exactly the same way. This one seems to have slightly different firmware because it will power on if you hit buttons such as play. I don't really know how all this worked out, but I'm certainly not about to do any gift horse dentistry. I'm just going to enjoy them for what they are. And I thought I'd pass along an interesting tip along the way if you should ever find yourself in a similar situation.